That's what I'm talking about, son. Get you some of that daggone pie.
Woo-hoo! Looky there. There's your bug-eyed big one right there.
Getting started. We're getting started.
Here's what I'm talking about. Gosh dang gorilla.
Let's go, baby. Straight meat. God, look at that big one.
All right, everybody, welcome into the show. I'm your host, Big Ed, and on the line tonight, we have got Bryant Smith, and we are going to be talking a little bit about some of the fall transition. You know, that's the big topic right now. We got what's going on out here, and so we'll get into that, and so sit back and tune in, and let's get this thing started. So, Bryant, welcome into the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you know, you're an MLF pro. You fish some of the. You just said you fish some of the National Professional League too. Is that what it's?
Yeah, it's the National Professional Fishing League.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoy doing that. Yeah, and then I did some of the Bassmaster Opens this year.
So you're out there quite a bit. You do a lot. Look like you had a couple of with the MLF stuff. You have a couple wins there, and how are you doing on some of the other circuits?
Yeah, I don't actually get a chance to fish much of the MLF anymore, just because I'm not home. But the past couple of years, it's been really good. I've had a lot of good times on the National Professional Fishing League. Getting to travel around the country and fish a lot of places that I haven't gotten a chance to. You know, growing up on the West Coast, we're kind of tucked away over here. We don't get a lot of exposure to some of that eastern stuff, and you know, I'm biased. I think the fishing is better out here, but you know, it's fun to mix it up and go do some different things that we don't get to do out on the West Coast.
Yeah, the fishing's definitely different. You know, it's, you know, you're dealing with some deeper water stuff here compared to a lot of the shallow there. You're maybe more bites out here, more fishing out here, more fish out here, more. I don't know. It just seems a lot different than when I talk to guys back east. They a lot of times, you know, they're like, "Oh yeah, we caught 6 or 7 fish today," and you know, we're out here going, "Okay, well, we caught 35, but what?"
Yeah, for sure. I don't think a lot of the West Coast guys know how good they have it out here. You know, just fishing pressure alone, it's absolutely unbelievable what those lakes go through back there. And granted, they are much bigger than a lot of the places we have out here, but you know, fishing pressure alone is just it's a huge deal back there that you have to worry about. Whereas out here, you know, I bet you could go to Clear Lake right now on the weekend. Granted, it'd be a little hard to launch your boat, but you can go to Clear Lake on a weekend and probably only see 10 boats, which is just crazy, and one of the best bass fisheries in the world. So it's a lot different, and that old adage, a bass is a bass, is, you know, it's kind of accurate, but man, once you get east of the Rockies, it really does change a lot. There's a lot more there's a lot, especially if you travel around, there's a lot of diversity over there for sure.
Yeah, you mean just in the different styles of lake over there, the different
Mhm.
kinds, you know, what you're fishing. You know, I feel like they have most of the fisheries are pretty much largemouth dominated, with a few being smallmouth and then very few being spots, as
Mhm.
compared to here, where we have a lot of spotted bass lakes. I mean, there's a lot of them, you know, out here, just because they are such an adaptable fish. You know, as compared to back there, where, you know, they're talking, you know, 2-pounders, 3-pounders are big spots, you know, and we're like, no. You know, with the same thing with largemouth is that, you know, they're just fishing for a different, you know, like the lakes are shallower, the lakes are, you know, more adaptable to a largemouth. Is that kind of what you see out there?
I do, man. You know, there's you know, largemouth is definitely king out there. And you know, you could argue that the largemouth's king on the West Coast too, but the diversity of fish we get to fish for is pretty cool. You know, There's only a handful of lakes that I fished back there, not very many at all, that actually have all 3 species, largemouth,
Hmm.
spots, and smallmouth, and, there's a lot of spotted bass out there, but it's definitely not like there's definitely not as many as there is largemouth, and there's definitely not as many, spotted bass fisheries, per acre, per mile, whatever you wanna say, as there is in
Right.
California, and, it's probably why, at least for me, I love fishing for spotted bass. I think they're the coolest fish in the world. But
Mhm.
so I feel real lucky when we get to go to a spotted bass fishery back there, and you know, go 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 play with my old friends.
Yeah. So you said you're not home. So is that are you do you live back east mostly and then you come back out here on the west, or are you out here now again?
No, I've always lived on the West Coast.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
and we moved up. Me and my wife moved up to Roseville, California. Still in
Yeah.
California, Roseville, about 4 years ago,
Oh, okay.
and so I do basically the only tournaments I fish are back east. So I do a lot of
Oh,
flying, getting on planes, and flying back and forth. But I still live out here on the West Coast. I just have a little bit of a commute to go to the East Coast to go fish a tournament.
so what do you think about the Apex? And have you looked into fishing that at all?
I have. I think it's a great program, a great circuit for the West, and it's definitely something we've needed out here. We need that top tier
Yeah.
circuit for guys to, so they don't have to do what I did. Because it's not easy to go live on the West Coast and go fish on the East Coast.
It is not.
So no, it's not at all. And I think that's a big gap that we've always had on the West Coast, and Apex is really filling that gap pretty well, where they can go fish big dollar tournaments and go fish for with a lot of publicity and not have to go travel 2,000 miles to get to the nearest lake. Um,
Right.
you know, it, it is a very southern dominated sport, but that doesn't mean that we don't have good anglers on the West Coast. And to get a showcase for those anglers like they do on the Apex Tour, like that's just awesome, man. And if I had the time and the resources to do it, I would absolutely love to do it. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work out with my schedule right now.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things that I think that we've proven, or I don't want to say we, but there are anglers out here on the West Coast that have proven that they can go out there and be the best in the world and fish those and adapt to those things coming from the background that they come from out here. I mean, you've got I won't even be able to list them all, but I mean, just the top ones that you can think of, with Aaron Martins, Skeet Reese, Ishman Rowe, Cody Myers, all these big name guys that are out there doing it on the big circuits. They're proving the West Coast is bringing out, and we have anglers.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think a lot of that it comes from it's something I've always believed in. We have, especially in Northern California, we
Mm,
have the best training ground there is to develop a very versatile bass fisherman. We have the Delta, which is tidal, shallow water grass. Then
right.
we got Clear Lake, which is the natural lake. Kind of it's funny. I've been to Clear Lake, and it's actually, or I've been, I've fished Clear Lake all my life, and it's actually reminded me of when I've gotten to go back east. It's reminded me of a place in Florida, and it's also
Hmm.
reminded me of a place in Wisconsin. So you kind of get that natural lake feel with the grass and the rock piles and all that.
Right.
Um, and then, like we talked about earlier, you got the spotted bass fisheries, deep, clear water. If you want to venture down south, you got all those big largemouth and all those clear water reservoirs. So you got to do the light line thing. We got the
Hmm.
Columbia River if you want to go up north. You got the Colorado River if you want to go down to the desert. I mean, we really do have one of the best training grounds for developing a super versatile angler who who's going to be comfortable with 6-pound tests, and they're going to be comfortable with 65-pound braid, which is pretty cool. And I've gotten to spend a lot of time on the East Coast, and what we have is really special with how close all those fisheries are. You really got to do some driving to get out of that region that you're in on the East Coast. Everything's very similar within the regions, and you got to
Right.
drive pretty far. So I think the versatility that we get coming out of the West Coast is what makes all those guys you just listed so great and have so much success on the East Coast.
Yeah, for sure. I love the way you put that. That it is out here, and the opportunities out here to fish the way that everybody else fishes is so all over the country. Just right here in our own backyard is outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and speaking about kind of doing that, we're getting ready right now to head into where I guess you talk about Northern California, and it's snowing in Minnesota, and there's storms in Wisconsin, and all these different places are cold, and they just went from 65 to 25, in a couple days, and all these different things. And yet here we sit in Northern California, and I don't know about your house right now, but it's like 80 degrees here. I'm up in Grass Valley, so it's like 80 degrees up here. And I know Roseville and Sacramento, they're probably 82, 86, 88, still. And I want to say that we're going into this fall/winter transition like the most of the country, but we are not. I mean, we're eventually going to get there. We all hope. But as we go into this, what have you been seeing as you're out there fishing, the changes that do go on when you're talking about, yeah, it's still 90 degrees here, but I got to go fish back east where it's not. In this fall, this transition, what do you see the fish start to do?
Yeah. So the turnover is kind of the thing that really
Yeah.
that I look for, or that I look for in really showing that the fall transition is coming. We just fished. I just finished up fishing the Bassmaster Southern Open on Lake Hartwell, and actually the transition, or the not the transition. What did I just say?
Turnover.
The turnover. Yes, sorry. The turnover just happened like right in the middle of the tournament. It was
Oh.
crazy. Water went from super clear to kind of a greenish color, and then back to clear in like 4 days. It was crazy, but that was the turnover, and the fish you had to adjust with those fish as well. I think the thing that happens on the West Coast that's a little bit different is we always have those Indian summers, and we always have like you said, it's 80 degrees at your house, it's 85 at my house. It just kind of pushes everything back a little bit. The fish know. I still truly believe that the fish know that fall is coming. They know that winter is coming, just based off of length of day. It's not sunny, or it's not sun's not setting at 9 o'clock anymore. It's setting at 7 to 7:30. So I think fish really pay attention to that. Just internally, they know that that's going on.
Right.
Whether or not the water temp and the weather really go along with it. So I think the biggest thing that happens in the fall transition is that these fish really kind of scatter out. They group up a lot in the summer, group up out deep in the current offshore, but the fall transition kind of presents a really cool opportunity for a lot of things to happen, and you can kind of pick your poison with what you want to do. If you want to go fish for some deep fish, there's absolutely going to be a bunch of deep fish left this time of year. But you also have the option, and it's kind of the overlooked option, especially with the way fishing is going and everything's being so forward-facing, sonar dominated.
Right.
There's some fish that kind of get forgotten about, and those are the ones that get up shallow this time of year that you can catch on a lot of different baits, a lot of fun baits.
Right.
I love picking up a buzzbait this time of year and going up a river, or in the back of a creek where you really wouldn't think that there'd be a bass, and there might only be 5 or 10 in the back of this creek, a bigger creek, but they're not messed with. They're not, they haven't seen a bait in a while. So I
Right.
think they're a little easier to catch this time of year because they're those overlooked fish. And, I'll grab a buzz bait or, if they don't want to come up, one of my favorite baits this time of year is a Strike King 1.5 square bill, and just
Hmm.
burn the bank up in the backs of these pockets and these creeks, trying to focus on isolated cover and, if there's a lay down in the water or a rock pile or whatever a bass could find and hang out next to. It's really target oriented. It's a really a cool way to fish because it's kind of like the way we all started fishing. It's, you go to the back of the creek and you go fish the one piece of wood back there, and you catch the fish off of it. It's pretty cool. It's kind of like I call it Bubba fishing this time of year, but I think those fish are really, really overlooked, especially like I said, with the advent of forward-facing sonar and having so many other options. But it's
Right.
uh, it's definitely something. If in the next few weeks, if I was fishing in California, especially, we're getting those cooler nights, that would be something I'd start to look for.
Mustang Survival, home of the original floater coat. With over 50 years of experience in engineering and manufacturing the best in marine safety and comfort, we've got you covered when fishing in all conditions.
Now, do you find that when you do chase something, you said they basically start to break apart. They get out of the groups, they get
Mhm.
out of those things, and most of the time, bigger fish are loners, anyways. But do you find that those fish that do break off and head back in and are just setting up, that you will find ones and twos, maybe 10 in the whole thing, but just they're more separate. They're more, like, hey, don't forget that there's probably only going to be one on this one piece of wood, and then
Mhm.
find another one there, find another one there. Is that kind of what you see?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. I did this last year on Grand Lake, and I was just fishing isolated pieces of cover all day long. And it was, and they were super, super shallow. It was
Mhm.
late September. So kind of the same deal, a little later in the year,
Right.
right when that transition starting to happen. And water temp was still mid 70s, but I was still catching them in a foot of water or less sometimes. And those fish, I think they're just really, really overlooked this time of year, but they are those singles. You're not going to pull up to an isolated laydown in the back of a creek and catch 15 off of it. You
Right.
might, I shouldn't say you won't. You might if it's really, really big, but
Right.
like those perfect little isolated ones that just look textbook. I think they're only going to have one, maybe two fish, but they might be one of the bigger fish that you'll catch that day. So it's a really great opportunity to kind of run and gun a little bit, do the power fishing thing. I still think you're fishing for some of the biggest fish in the lake when you do that.
Now, the other side of that is, you're talking about power fishing through there and everything, but do you still, if you come up upon, you're going down you're going down the bank there and you see like this really beautiful lay down log and it's just there and you go over it 3 or 4 times with a buzz bait and then you hit it with the crankbait and you hit it with that. Do you stop at that point and go, no, there should be something there,
Mhm.
and then pick it apart? Or do you just go, well, guess nothing's there, and just keep going?
I'll let the fish tell me that.
Okay.
But your progression was perfect. I always like to start with the buzzbait because it's super quick and
Mhm.
if I could draw that fish, especially this time of year, they like to suspend a lot. So even if that laydown's in 4 feet of water, that fish might be in that top foot of the water column. So buzzbait going over their head super easy. Um, but if it's that really juicy looking laydown, then that progression is absolutely what I'll do. I'll go from that buzz bait and then I'll go subsurface with a square bill, maybe a swim jig. And then one of my favorite ways to catch them this time of year is actually flipping the isolated cover too with a rage bug.
Hmm.
I like a really light weight on that. It's kind of one of the only times a year that I really do use a lightweight, like a quarter, 5/16, something like that, something that can fall really slow. Because again, I think those fish are suspended this time of year. a lot of the time. So something that falls a little slower but has a lot of action, especially, you get into the backs of the creeks, a lot of times they're a little dirtier. So something that moves a little bit of water. But yeah, that progression is absolutely perfect. If it's a good looking lay down, or maybe I practiced it and I got a buzzbait bite
Right.
in practice, and I come back a few days later during the tournament or next weekend, and like I throw the buzzbait over, nothing happens. Oh, there's a fish there. I know there is. They're not going to move too much this time of year once they set up. That's when I'll grab a flip it stick and grab that rage bug and flip it in there. And just trying to pick it apart a little bit for sure.
Okay. Yeah. That to me, that, that just makes a bunch of sense. And you really led to one thing there that I see a lot this time of year. And that is that when those lakes start to turn over, those fish a lot of times they'll just pull off the bank for, maybe a day or two and suspend. And they won't, they're just like, whatever, not really getting this or feeling this, but we're going to, I'm gonna go sit out here. If that happens, you talked about a tournament that happened during the tournament. If that does happen, is there a way to catch those fish? Are those fish just totally negative? Or, it's like, what I've found? I found that I can go do this and catch those fish.
I think there is. And so I'll lead into it with, I think the best way to do it is with some sort of forward facing sonar. Because it is going to still be a little bit random where they are. Suspended fish, yeah, they might be over the tip of a point, but they might be over the tip of a point, especially out in California. You go to Orville or Shasta this time of year, when that transition happens, they could be in 5 feet of water over 100.
Right.
And those are very catchable fish. Depending on your watercolor, a top water is perfect. Some sort of walking bait is probably my number one bait to get those fish to bite. Or a jerk bait, something like that. But you can catch them without forward facing sonar, but having forward facing sonar it makes it a lot easier. I'll just say that. Because you can actually target where those fish are instead of just kind of, the way I used to do it was you just pull up to the point and you just fan cast over the point, and you always make that one cast way out there in the middle just to see if somebody's out there. But now I just, you just pan around with your trolling motor and, oh, there it is. Let me throw my top water over it, or let me throw a jerk bait next to it and see if I can get that fish to bite. That being said, those fish are still really hard to catch when they get in that mood. When they get in that mood, right when the lake's kind of turning over and they go out to suspend, and everything's just kind of changing. They're in that little bit of a funk. But if you throw to enough of them, you can catch some really, really nice fish doing that.
Yeah, it seems like some of the bigger fish are the ones that tend to go up there and suspend. Like smaller fish, like the 13, 12, 13, 14-inch fish don't seem to be as affected as it. Either that, or they're just so trying to feed up before winter comes that they're they're a little more aggressive, and that seems to be like what people end up catching.
Absolutely,
they go out and have those smaller fish days during those turnovers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a really tough time of year to fish. It really is, and you kind of have to have a different mindset than a lot of the other times of years, because you have to be open to fishing for suspended fish, over 100 feet of water. But then, you also have to keep the shallow bite honest, and they can just kind of be anywhere, and they can be in any mood that day. So switching it, I mean, my best advice would be just switch it up as much as you possibly can until something starts to click for you.
I'll tell you, let's do this really quick. What's your top 5 baits right now, during this transition that you're just like, you know what, I'm taking 5 rods, I'm going out, this is what I think I can get them on?
Bass U, folks. Information is pouring over. If you want to learn more about every lake, how to fish shallow, deep, in between, skipping docks and rocks and cranking, slow wiggling, chatter, smattering, you get it at Bass U. We got the best of the best. If somebody's ever caught a bass on something and perfected the technique, we got you covered. Get on Bass U TV, check it out, sign up, be a member, be part of it, folks. Keep learning. I'm Gerald Swindle. Subscribe to Bass U.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one is going to be a buzzbait, and I'll end up putting some sort of swimming frog on the back of it. I take the skirt off, put a swimming frog on the back of it. That's my number one, and it's not so much that I get a ton of bites on it, but I absolutely love doing it. And then you can get some really, really big ones on it too. The second one will be that striking 1.5, something that you could really cover some water with, subsurface. For those walking bait fish that, a top water, Strike King, Sexy Dog, Hard Knock. That is my absolute favorite. Just any sort of walking bait like that, to get those suspended fish going. And then let's see, if you're in the say like a clear lake or a delta where there's some grass involved,
Right.
some sort of vibrating jig. And I tend to go to white this time of year just because the shad tend to be a little bit
Get pale,
more favored.
Yeah, they get a little paled
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and I think the bass tend to favor the shad just a little bit more in the fall. And then that flipping setup, like I was talking about, a lightweight, and then some sort of creature bait that's got a lot of action to it, falls really slow. Just something you can kind of go behind and like we were talking about earlier. If you got that perfect piece of cover and you've thrown the buzz bait, you've thrown the square bill over it, nothing happened. I just pitch that little bit creature bait in there and see if one was really living in there.
Okay, that's a great start for people to go out. It's like, hey, you're going to go out in the fall right now, and you want to start fishing and seeing what you can get. That right there, those are your top 5. So tie them up, see if they work. Other thing we have, with this whole the fall transition in these, how important is it to really start paying attention to where these fish are going? Because the next logical step is going to be the winter, and the winters come in, these fish are starting to feed up, they know what's coming, and it is a time that we the winter time is winter going into spring is probably the number one for really big fish. But this is also a time when, you start seeing the little 12 and 13-inch fish go away, and you start seeing more and more of the bigger fish, but you get less bites, less fish. But how important is it to really start paying attention to where these fish are headed? Because the wintertime haunts is where it's going to be. This is where they're going. They're going to go where they're going to sit. So is it important to see now, or do you have to wait till winter to really find those fish?
No, they're out there. They're always out there. Just this time of year, for some reason, I think it's just a little bit harder to target them. And I think the main reason is because it's always a moving target. They do a lot, in the winter, they're kind of stationary. Like you said, that's their spot. And that's where they're going to hang out for the most part for all winter. Summertime's kind of the same deal. It's the spring and the fall where you're always trying to find where they're going.
Right.
And if you can stay ahead of those fish, that'll enable you to continue to catch them throughout the fall, transition into winter, in that deal. So following and knowing where those fish are going to be is obviously super, super important, and knowing where they are is important as well. You want to catch them that day, but following the progression of it is really important. It's just like springtime. It's the opposite of springtime. Basically, you're going to find them in the backs of the creeks, and then they're going to move out to the main lake for the winter. So, and that's kind of a reason why 4 of those 5 baits that I mentioned, you can really cover some water with. And that's something that I think is absolutely paramount this time of year, is really covering some water. If you're not covering water this time of year, you're going to be missing out on a lot of fish. There's a ton of active fish this time of year. They know winter's coming. They know that they need to feed up. And if you're not getting bit, either you're not around active fish or you're not covering enough water to move to kind of run into those active fish. So covering water is going to also really help you figure out where those fish are. And then once you have where they're at, then you could kind of follow the natural progression of where they're going to go.
Okay, when you're now, you know, that's always a subject that I think is important for people, especially, you know, the average guy going out and maybe doesn't get to fish quite as much as you do. You know, he's going out, he's got his weekend off, you know, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do some fishing. I want to cover some water. I want to, you know, and this guy, you know, Brian just told me I got to cover water. I got to cover water. So is it a matter of just like, you know, hey, put your trolling motor down, put 2 rods on the deck and go, you know, throw the buzz bait, throw the crankbait? Or are you, when you say covering water, are you just burning bank, or are you and looking for, you know, hey, I want that fish that is active and he's going to bite no matter what? Boom, that's what I want. Or are you kind of going back over water, you know, and hitting it 2 or 3 times, but still covering it quickly? You know, because you're talking about buzz baits, crankbaits, you know, swim jigs, things like that, where you're covering, you can cover a lot of water with that.
Yeah.
But what if they're, you know, how do you break that down to somebody and say, yeah, you want to cover water, but you also want to cover it completely, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to break it down a little further, it would be um, so we talked about there's going to be those shallow fish,
Right.
and then there's still going to be the main lake fish on the points and stuff like that. Those shallow fish in the backs of the creeks, those are fish that a lot of times I'm just covering the water. I'm going down the bank as fast as possible, and trying to pick apart all the little isolated pieces of cover. Now that being said, if I have a creek and I know it pretty well, you know, maybe it's a creek on my home lake, whatever, and I know where these laydowns are, or I know where there's a few little isolated rock piles, I'm not going to go and fish down the bank if I know where the high percentage spots are going to be. Uh, that's always my deal, and I think it's why, um, especially in the fall, I do pretty well is because I'm always trying to figure out the highest percentage spots. I don't if I can avoid going down the bank, I will, unless it's just a really good creek.
Yeah.
But if I can make, you know, 10 casts on a really good isolated piece of cover and just go to the next one and not have to worry about any of the bank in between, I'm being a lot more efficient that way.
Okay.
Now to find those pieces of cover, sometimes you do got to go fishing, and that's where kicking your trolling motor on 70 or 80 and going down the bank real quick, you can find a lot of spots like that. But once you have those areas, or those isolated pieces of cover in the backs of the creeks, then what you want to, at least what I'd like to do is just run those, you know, not worry about any of the water in between. And then the main lake fish, same deal. If I know they're on, you know, 6 of these points throughout the lake, I'll just run those 6 points.
Right.
I don't need to worry about any of the points in between because I'm just kind of wasting my time. Now, that being said, to find those points, sometimes you got to fish through them pretty, you know, you got to fish through 20, and then you'll find 2 or 3 really good ones. And then you got to go fish through 20 more and find 2 or 3 good ones. So that's why I have those. That's why my baits this time of year are those power fishing baits, because I can go cover water and I can really break down the lake as quickly as possible. So I can find those fish. I don't have to really, I don't like fishing down the bank. I think it's a lot of times it can be a waste of time. So if you can just find those isolated pieces of cover and then the points that got them on the main lake, that's what I'd like to do. And just run those things over and over and over again until your timing gets right and that fish pulls up and wants to eat.
Yeah. See, that's that does, you know, make a lot of sense to me. And I think that's also, you know, one of the advantages now to this forward, you know, the forward facing sonar, where you can, you know, maybe you pull up on that point and you just, you know, you hit it and graph it and go, there's only like 2 fish there. You know, now,
Absolutely.
sometimes those two fish are going to be the two biggest fish because they're, semi, whatever, depending on what lake you're on. I mean, if it's Oroville, you probably aren't going to really care that there's two fish sitting there.
No, if you're at Oroville, there's a point somewhere that's got 200 on it. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep going until I find that one.
But it's one of those things where it can really help break that down. One of the things that you've really talked about is this time of year is those backs of those creeks. Now, why are those this time of year really becoming the the high percentage areas? Why are the backs of the creeks really producing?
It's kind of twofold, and I mentioned the first part earlier. Is they're kind of forgotten. Like I said earlier, with that forward facing sonar, and I find myself doing it all the time too. A lot of guys kind of get stuck with their head down, and they don't see the lake anymore. They just see the screen.
Right.
And it's hard to get away. It's such an effective way to fish. It's really hard to get away from it. But if you can break away from that screen a little bit and go back a couple of years in time and go down the bank with the buzz bait and the square bill and stuff like that in the backs of creeks, you're going to see that you're not going to run into a lot of boats.
Right.
And then you're gonna be fishing for some they're just really not pressured anymore. And the other reason is the natural progression of, again, progression would be a bad word, not the greatest word for it, but the kind of the way that the bait fish are going to move this time of year. You're going to have a lot of bait fish that move into the backs of these creeks, and you're going to have a lot of bluegill back there still, a lot of sunfish that are already back there. So right. It's kind of an area where a lot of the bait is going to be this time of year. And, that's the old adage is right. Find the bait and you'll find the fish. And that's just kind of something you want to keep in your mind for sure. If you go in the back of a creek and you see a lot of bait flickering and, you see some bluegill popping, that's the one I want to be in. That's the one I want to fish around real quick, fish those high percentage spots, fish those laydowns, pieces of wood, rock piles, whatever it is.
Right.
Maybe there's a dock back there. I don't know. But fish those isolated pieces of cover because the bait fish is there.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was, wanting to see if you'd lead to is, that's what you're going to start following those bait fish, because this is the time of year that the shad and that sort of thing. I'm guessing this is when they start to spawn. This is when they're going to start moving back in there, looking for those little pockets where they can load up, hit the eggs or whatever it is and lay it down. I've never really seen a big shad spawn, but I have seen what happens after it.
And that's always a good thing to be around. Just, I don't know why they go back there. That's just, I see a lot of them back there at this time of year in that transition. I never really get into the science of it. I just, I've always seen them back there. Yeah, I've always seen them back there this time of year. So I'm going to go back there and see if the bass have found them too.
Now, do you really find that across the country, that it doesn't seem to matter what lake you're on or where you're at? That's just the way almost all these lakes really set up.
It is, to a certain point, absolutely. Seasonal patterns. So, like when I go to a new lake, maybe it's one I've never been to. I do a lot of research on, you want to know the good areas. Like for example, if you're going to Clear Lake for the first time and you're going there in the spring, you want to know, okay, yeah, the North Shore is great. It's going to be the first one to pop off. It's where those fish move up into all those bays in the springtime. General knowledge like that, you definitely want to know. But the thing that I really, really pay attention to is seasonal patterns. And I know I said earlier, a bass isn't always a bass as far as East Coast to West Coast. They do act differently. But there is one thing that they never really deviate from, and that is the seasonal pattern. Now, it might look different in different parts of the country.
Right.
It might look way different. if you're going, say, to Orville, and those fish are moving back into the creeks, well, that creek could be still 100 feet deep
Yeah.
in the back, and that's still them being in the back of a creek. That's where the bait wants to be. Whereas you go to Oklahoma, Grand Lake, like I was talking about earlier, in the back of a creek, you're blowing up mud with your trolling motor and you're fishing this one piece of wood in 6 inches of water. So it may look different, but the seasonal pattern is going to be the same. That fish is going to move back there because the bait fish are back there.
Right. And it's funny you say that, you talk about the seasonal patterns, and it's one of those questions that I've always, a lot of it comes from, just knowledge overall. I talked to Shaw Grigsby one time about this, and it's how do you really know? It's when is it time to tie on that jig? When is it time to tie on that buzzbait? When is it time to tie on the Alabama rig? All of a sudden is it just like, hey, you start hearing people are catching them on it. You just know from experience, because there's a lot of guys who, aren't in the sport enough, and they don't, they're just watching, and, they maybe miss the swim bait bite, or they miss the Alabama rig bite, or they miss the, whatever it is. How is it that you really know over the years, that's what, it's time to tie on the rip baits. It's time to tie this on, because there's times when they don't work,
Yeah.
but when is it that it's like, man, these guys sure seem to know when that thing, when that thing's popping, they're on it. What is it that really triggers those decisions?
Yeah, a lot of it's going to be time on the water. Just putting yourself in a lot of different scenarios over the years, seeing a lot of different weather changes and seasonal movements, being able to follow fish throughout the year. A lot of it's that. But to learn that, you have to, you hear the dock talk and all that stuff, and
Right.
you go to local tackle shop and they say, yeah, this is happening here, this is happening there. That's great, and you can get a lot of good information there. But you have to be the guy that's not afraid to tie it on. That's the thing. If it's April and it's still a little chilly out, but in May there's a great topwater bite, you can't be afraid to be that guy to throw the topwater bite when it's still a little bit colder, because you're gonna be showing those fish that before anybody else does. And I think that's what a lot of guys who do really well, they kind of get on those bites before they really start to happen. But all it takes is maybe 1 or 2 bites to steer them in the right direction. So, not being afraid to throw something maybe a little bit earlier than you would think. And then, just experiment.
Yeah.
That's what, especially if you're on the West Coast, that's the biggest thing I always tell everybody is, if you're on the West Coast and you're not getting bit, it's not a good thing. You're either not around fish, which is really hard on the West Coast, or you're just not doing the right thing.
Right.
So if you just rotate through things, eventually you're going to be around fish. It's just, that's how good our fisheries are. It's just, you have to figure out what they want to bite that day. That's all it is. So just keeping it fresh, always changing baits. If you're not getting bit, just change. You're already not getting bit.
What's the worst that can happen? You don't catch fish, right?
Exactly. You're not going to get bit on something else, but at least you tried. So keeping it, always keeping it fresh, always changing, and always trying to stay ahead of those fish. Will really, really help you put a lot of extra fish in the boat.
Well, and that leads me to a really good question. Well, heck, I'm going to say it's a really good question because I'm asking it. Is the guys get out there, especially on the West Coast, because we do have a lot more places that you can go and you're catching fish. Now, let's say you're out there on a day, and it's like, what, I'm having a good day, I'm catching a lot of fish, but man, I am just not catching. I'm catching 2-pounders all day. Where's the 4s and 5s? I know this lake holds them. I know Clear Lake holds 4s and 5s. I know the Delta holds 15-pounders or 10-pounders or 9-pounders. How come I'm not catching those? When do you tell somebody, it's like, if maybe you caught 25 fish today on this bait, but every one of them was 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. you're on the Delta, man. You need to be catching 5 and 6 pounders.
Mm-hmm.
When and how do you really tell people it's like, stop catching fish and go find those fish?
I mean, when they want to stop catching them.
Well, I mean, I mean, by saying that, I mean, when is it time to say, okay, yeah, I'm catching, 2 pounders on a Senko?
Yeah.
Well, but I know 5 pounders will eat it. Why,
Yeah.
when do you stop and say, okay, maybe this is all that's eating it right now? Is there a way to break that down and say, hey, you know what? If you're catching them on a Senko and 2 pounders on a Senko, yeah, you should be able to catch 5 pounders on a Senko, but maybe you ought to start punching. Maybe you ought to try,
Yeah.
is there a techniques and styles that definitely will get a better fish over a smaller fish when you're in a situation where I'm having a heck of a day? I just wanted to come out here and catch 25 fish, but man, I'm really tired of that and I want to catch some big fish.
Bass Angler Magazine is your guide to better bass fishing. Bass Angler is dedicated to helping you catch more and bigger bass no matter what time of year or where you live. This is not your ordinary fishing magazine. Every issue is jam-packed with 30-plus articles from the world's best bass anglers. Bass Angler Magazine is available at bassanglermag.com, Tackle Warehouse, Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, Gander Mountain, Walmart, and better tackle shops everywhere. Bass Angler also makes a great gift for any angler. Get Bass Angler today and start catching more bass tomorrow. Visit bassanglermag.com or your favorite tackle shop. This is not your ordinary fishing magazine. bassanglermag.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And I think you hit it on the head is that it's going to be a technique.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously area has a lot to do with it too.
Right.
You want to be around big fish areas, and that just comes with time.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of just learn it over time. But the one thing you can do is change your technique. Like you said, you can catch big fish on a Senko. You can catch 5 pounders on a Senko. You can catch big ones on a drop shot. You can catch big ones on a spinning rod in general. But there are techniques that they just tend to, catch the eye of the bigger ones a lot more often. Punching grass,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big fish technique. Throwing a frog, that's a big fish technique. Throwing any sort of topwater, in my eyes, big fish technique. Rolling a big swim bait around, not something I like to do, but it's a big fish technique. Glide bait, just change to something that catches big ones. You've heard a lot about it, catching big fish.
Yeah,
that'd be my suggestion. Now, like you said, you could just go and you catch 25 2-pounders, and then the 26th one's a 5-pounder.
Yeah.
It happens, but I think changing your technique is going to be the best way to kind of change your outcome for sure, and catch, at least appeal to a bigger fish then.
Right. All right. Well, we've got about 8 to 10 minutes left here that I got this show. And, Bryant, we've been talking to you here for the last, 50 minutes. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself too? I mean, you kind of told us where you're from and how you did it, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and, some of your sponsors? Give us some detailed information on who you are and where people can find you and follow you and promote some stuff.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in California. I fished on the West Coast my whole life. I kind of did the natural, it felt natural to me, the natural progression, the kind of stepping stone, working my way up. I started in, I don't know what they call them these days. We called them the rookie leagues back then, just team tournaments. Did them with my dad, did them with a couple of my best friends. Did that for a little while, started having some success, jumped into some, they're MLFs now, from the front of the boat. Got my butt kicked a few times, a lot of times actually, but kept showing up, and eventually, I kind of got it figured out a little bit and started having some success in all the pro-ams out here, won a few tournaments here and there. And then, gosh, what was it? I guess 2021, I decided to go fish the National Professional Fishing League, and I was, that's the dream, right? You always want to go fish a national tour, and I knew MLF was going to be a little difficult to qualify for. The elites are going to be really hard to qualify for, and I had this opportunity with the new circuit, the new national circuit, and jumped on with them, and I've had a few really good years with them. And then this past year, I actually jumped into the Bassmaster Opens, and I guess it's been about a week and a half ago. I fished the last Southern Open and actually ended up qualifying for the Elite Series. So that'll be
Wow.
that'll be pretty cool. That's totally a dream come true, and it's something I've always wanted to do, and I got really fortunate that it ended up working out really well this year, and I get to go do that next year, and couldn't do it without all my friends and family and sponsors, especially my wife, man. She really holds it down. We have a 5 week year old 5 week 5 week year old 5 week old baby here, and man, she's taking care of him while I'm out gallivanting across the country trying to catch these little green bass. And man, without her taking care of everything, there's no dream like that. There's no dream. There's no Elite Series. There's no National Professional Fishing League. So without her, none of this happens. But friends, family, all their support is absolutely huge. And then all my sponsors, Ranger Boats, Mercury Outboards, Strike King, Lose Reels, Buck and Bass, Angler's Asset, Greater Bay, Dobbins. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple. I'm so bad at this, but man, those companies, they help me out, and it really takes an army.
Right.
It's a very single person sport. It seems that way, at least. You're the one on the front of the boat. You're the one making the decisions. You don't have a pit crew. You don't really have a coach. Sometimes you got some teammates, but not really. But it's the army behind me that really makes it happen. Without them, like I said, this dream doesn't happen.
Yeah, and that's that's really the best part, I think, of this sport, is the fact that I think a lot of people believe, it's like, yeah, you're just out there fishing, and it's like, if it was only that easy.
Exactly.
I get that all the time, that people just don't understand. It's like, oh, you fish tournaments, and so you're just out there, kicking back, drinking a few beers, and having a good time, right? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
The amount of one of the things you said earlier, is the whole winning losing thing, and I tell people all the time, it's like the biggest thing you have to learn in this one is to lose, because you will lose a lot.
Absolutely.
That when you
absolutely, if you're not a good loser, this ain't the sport for you.
Graceful.
You got to learn. Yeah, you got to learn from your losses. That's the biggest thing.
And I think we all got I think the nation got a big dose of that this past couple weeks with the whole weight scandal.
Oh yeah.
I will never defend what those guys did, but I will tell you this much: the pressure to win, the pressure to be the top like that, really does show up at that level. And you have to be a person of character to not only succeed, but to lose, and understanding how to spin a loss, how to take that loss and say, you know what? Yeah, it sucked today for me. I didn't get it done. And not resort to doing something like what happened. Would you agree with that?
Yep. Absolutely, man. If you're going to talk to 100, or say you talk to 1,000 seasoned tournament anglers, got a bunch of tournaments under their belt, it's always crossed their mind. There's no doubt. That little thing in the back of your head, oh yeah, it's just not worth it. Because what's the point of cheating and winning? It just takes away everything. It takes away all the hard work that you put into it. It takes away all, it just sucks. And to think that somebody would actually go through with that, it's really kind of sad. But that's them giving up. That's all that is they gave up. They thought that they were the best, and they things got that desperate and they needed to be the best. What, like, it's okay to lose. It's really okay to lose. Some of my most important tournaments that I've ever fished, I've gotten my butt kicked.
Yeah.
And I didn't win that week. I went home, $1,500, $2,000, gone in my bank account.
Right.
But I came home with a lot of knowledge, and I learned a lot that week. And those ones, as long as you're open to learning from your losses, this is going to be a really great sport for you.
Yep. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about, I've been doing this a long time too, is the fact that hard days are your learning days and easy days are the days that you just, all of the hardship that I've gone through, all the times that I've had bad tournaments, when it becomes that easy day and I cash that big check or I win or whatever it is, you just look back and go, oh, now I know why I had to go through all that. Now I understand.
Exactly. It makes it so much more sweeter.
Oh,
man,
of
to
course.
just to put that work, and that's with anything. You put the hard work in, and to actually see it come to fruition that's everything. That's why we do it. That is 100% why we do it. That's why we go and struggle through the early years of tournament fishing. It's why we do everything. We love to catch fish, and then we love to compete. And when those two things come together, it makes everything else, it doesn't even matter. Don't even matter about the bad tournaments. Don't care.
Right.
I'm going to enjoy my good tournament.
Yeah. I very rarely look back and go, you remember that time when I lost really bad? But it does give you that. Now, one of the last questions I want to ask you before we take off here is I love to get a guy who's made it as far as you have and is doing what you're doing. The youth coming up today, it's super, it is no longer what it used to be. And the opportunities that these kids are having, give me a piece of advice for those young guys coming up. You're up there now. I'm not going to say you've made it all the way. There's plenty more to go, but what's that one piece of advice that you can tell these guys coming up and say, hey, guys and gals, I do not want to exclude the women in this one at all. The guys and gals that are coming up and tell them, it's like, hey, if you're going to get into this and you want to be in this, this is what you need to really focus on.
Time on the water. That's it. If you're not willing to spend as much time on the water as you possibly can, you're not going to do as well as you could. Seeing and going to different places, putting yourself in different positions as far, it's not fun to go out when it's going to be, 30 degrees and blowing and raining all day. It's not fun to go out there, but if you go out there, you're going to learn something. You don't always want to pick the nice days to go out either. You want to experience, because tournaments aren't going to always be on the nice days. Actually, very rarely are they actually on the nice days. They're always on the crappy days, the windy days, the cold days, whatever. So seeing a lot of different scenarios and all that comes from time on the water. Just spend as much time out there. Like we talked about earlier, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to pick up a bait that maybe you haven't caught a fish on. Don't always go out with your comfort stuff. I remember growing up, a lot of times I'd break out, the Nico reel. That was what I had a bunch of confidence in, and that's all I wanted to throw because that's what I would catch fish on. Sometimes you got to put it away to learn a new technique. So those two things for sure is spend as much time on the water as you can, and then don't be afraid to learn a new technique. It's not the easiest thing in the world. There's going to be days where maybe you just don't get a bit on it, but the day that you do figure it out and you do gain some confidence in it, now you just added that into your repertoire, and now you're just that much more dangerous going down the road.
Good advice. I hear it a lot, time on the water. And it's obviously one of the most important things you can do out there, especially in this sport. So Well, Bryant, we're going to wrap this one up, man. I appreciate you coming on and giving us some time and giving us some knowledge. This is, a good show. Lots been out there, man. I really appreciate that.
I really appreciate you having me on. Yeah. And if anybody wants to follow along with me next year, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Bryant Smith Fishing. Just look that up. I should pop up. And man, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great time. And anytime you want to have me back on, I'd love to do it.
Absolutely. Your number's in the Rolodex here, so we got you going, and we will hopefully after a couple of these tournaments, maybe we'll hear you win one, and we'll get you back on, talk about how you did it.
I like the sound of that.
All right, Brian. Well, thanks you guys for tuning in. This has been the BAM Pod with your host, Big Ed Everhart. And I'll tell you what, tune back in, because in a couple of weeks, we'll have another really good angler out there. And, I'm going to work for you. So, all right. Have a good night, all.